The iPhone 7 Plus has been one of the biggest phones I have ever used. I mean, seriously, this thing is gigantic. Yeah, I know it's a pretty unusual way to start a video, but the size of this phone is kind of the only thing that has not really grown on me, even after using this device quite extensively for quite a lot of time now. And that's mainly because of the forehead and the chin of this device that contains the speakers and the earpiece and the home button. And it's also ridiculously expensive, so you should definitely head on to spear.io, which would not only serve you with the best pricing of the 7 Plus, but also give you a strong qualitative and quantitative analysis of the same. I've linked it below. But other than that, I've got to say this, that if you have not really seen this device in person, I'm pretty sure that you'll actually underestimate and underrate the design of this phone. It's pretty spectacular in terms of design. In fact, in my usage time, I kind of took some time off from the screen and actually gazed at the design, at the construction of this device, as I usually do. But what I figured out from my time with it is that the beauty of this device is actually its simplicity. It's much more cleaner than the last iteration, because now the antenna lines kind of go along with the boundary of the phone. So it feels a near plain design at the back, just a flat aluminium panel with logo of the company. It just looks very minimal, and I could not really get the black variant, but I got the silver one, and it did not really look the best at the very beginning, but after spending some time with it, it's actually pretty spectacular. Although I think it's a bit more slippery than the last one. The edges of the 7 Plus are much more soft and much more slippery than those of the 6 Plus, which kind of feel amazing in the hand, but they kind of take away from the practicality, and it kind of becomes very non-convenient. Of course, you can't use it with one hand, and that's really where the Apple's touch ability feature kind of comes in handy, but I usually used to forget about it. The hump on the camera as well is a much more bigger one this time, probably because of two different lenses it holds now, which I'll be talking about in depth in a bit. Oh, and yeah, the lack of headphone jack didn't really bother me that much. I've actually always used Bluetooth earbuds, so the headphone jack, even if present, would have been of pretty much no use to me. So I kind of adjusted to that subtraction kind of immediately, and it actually gave Apple room to build that taptic engine that would actually give you a taptic feedback every time you press the home button now. And that was actually my biggest concern, because the home button is actually not a button anymore. It's exactly like the trackpad in the MacBook and the new MacBook Pro. It takes some time to get used to, because every time you click on it, you kind of expect it to physically press down, but that doesn't happen. Instead, you get that very convincing and very satisfying taptic feedback from the bottom of the device, which is pretty great, but it will be rendered useless if you are wearing any kind of gloves and using it, because it won't function at all since it requires skin contact, and that's pretty much the only bummer that it brings along. Also, since the headphone jack is no longer there, the two grills are not the speakers. One of them is the microphone, but now it has stereo speakers. So the grill to the right of the lightning port is a speaker, and then there is another speaker embedded with the earpiece at the top of the device, which also screams sound. So pretty loud volumes this time, and it's also really clear. It does not really distort at higher volumes, and you kind of hear from both the top and the bottom of the device, so it feels as if the phone is singing, which is easily fabulous. But another thing that I really like in the 7 Plus is that display. It still has that same resolution, although it's pretty hard to tell that it's anything less than Quad HD. Obviously, you won't be able to differentiate between any pixels, but the best improvement is the wide color gamut and the increased brightness. First of all, that brightness, now it's actually soothingly bright. It's very much visible outdoors, so that's very convenient. And even in the indoors, the combination of such vivid and popping colors with increased brightness kind of makes it one of the best displays in the market right now. Oh, and the viewing angles have always been iPhone's strong point, and this is no exception. So all in all, the stereo speakers combined with this awesome display kind of make it probably the best media consumption device that you can get right now. But just like last year, you can also use the display with a little bit more force to enable certain more options. To me, 3D Touch kind of still feels to be in its infancy stage, because you can't really do a lot with it. Instead of just pressing app icons and getting a few options, or pressing hard on the left corner of the phone to enable multitasking. So not really something I use once every day or even every week, but it's good to have it. but nonetheless, it still maintains that really thin enclosure, although the battery has a tiny bit less capacity than the previous one, but the battery life in itself is actually really good. In fact, it can easily last you through a full day. I mean, easily. I used my devices really heavily. It's like a torture on them. At the end of the day, almost at midnight, I had about 20% battery life. And if that's the case with me, you can easily last through more than a day. I can pretty much guarantee you that. One more thing that the 7 Plus was actually insanely amazing at was the performance. So now it comes up with this A10 Fusion chip, which is a quad-core chip, and it brings along 3GB of RAM, and all these really high numbers on paper actually perform just as well in real-world scenarios, and that is amazing. I mean, its background app refresh limit is actually pretty good. So even if I've used this one app for quite some time and I switch to another and use that one for some time, and if I switch back to the former one, chances are I'll continue from where I left off, and that is amazing. But overall, the performance itself is very snappy. My device not even once hanged up, which is actually one of the many reasons why iOS is actually famous. And speaking of iOS, this runs iOS 10, which kind of brings along some neat features. My favorite being that race to wake up. Super convenient. And that's pretty much the performance. But one last thing, the camera. So the 7 Plus is kind of considered to be a phone with a camera whose quality matches old DSLR's quality. Now, I really don't want to get into that debate, but I do want to talk a lot about the iPhone 7 Plus's camera. So as I said in the very beginning, it's got two lenses this time, a 28mm and a 56mm, and inside that camera app, you can actually manually switch between those two lenses. And when you switch, you don't really actually zoom in. You literally shift to a completely different lens. So you don't really lose that sharpness, but I did notice some grain when I used the 56mm lens. But nonetheless, the performance is insanely great. I mean, that portrait mode that I'm pretty sure you've already heard of, it is amazing. Fun fact, it's actually in the beta, and even in beta, it delivered results that were way beyond my expectations. So first of all, it makes you set a position some feet away from the object you're focusing on, and once you're good to go, you snap a pic. It actually saves both the variants of the pic with the depth effect and without the depth effect, so you can actually see the difference. Even the regular pics kind of feel amazing, especially on this wide color gamut display. And even the video, I don't really have any samples to show you in this video, but the optical image stabilization is by far the best I have ever seen in a smartphone. Oh, and the front camera. The reason I don't really talk a lot about front cameras is pretty simple. I don't really use them a lot, but this one, I kind of use this more than I usually do, and it was pretty great. I mean, definitely won't be disappointed by that. So there you have it, guys. This is me speaking on the 7 Plus. I would have actually loved to make this my daily like forever, but just because of that huge size, I would have to kind of skip it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to share it, feel free to embed it, and I'll catch you in my next one, which is, you'll see yourself.